When creationists make the argument for a young Earth, it's pretty obvious that they are using pseudoscience. Whether they are doing this deliberately or if they're just mistaken is not always the easiest thing to tell. It depends on the individual. Anyone who might use such arguments to sell books and DVDs could well be taking advantage of this ambiguity. One of the things I like so much about science is the fact that it's a system of methodology which anyone can adopt for themselves, for free. I'm particularly drawn towards physics and astronomy myself. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, or even the universe for that matter. Gravity will always obey the inverse square law, atoms will always be composed of protons, neutrons and electrons, and light will always travel 186,000 miles in 1 second. These things, and many more, have been observed and verified by experiment, independently, so that physicists and astronomers, regardless of their location, religiosity or lack thereof, can all agree on these conclusions, because they conform with reality. One of the reasons I make these videos is to try to get through to the fundamentally religious, particularly the ones who claim that there's some kind of a scientific conspiracy to suppress the so-called truth of God, their God, in other words. And I really want them to understand that we know that there are thousands upon thousands of different denominations of Christianity alone, never mind all the other religions in the world, who all make claims, or nearly all make claims about the way the universe is, the way it works. And most of them think they're right, and they contradict and conflict with each other, and this is problematic. Science is different. There are many different branches of science: physics, biology, cosmology, geology, and while they study different areas, there's overlap. So the body of science as a whole is coherent. There is concordance between the research of different scientists in different areas. So when we are able to say and figure out that the universe is 13.7 billion years old, this is something that almost all scientists agree upon, and in the rare instances where some don't, it's usually due to a lack of understanding. Science is all about a logical and systematic way of figuring out how things work. It's a trial and error process which is always subject to correction. It is self-correcting. And that is why it is different from many religions. And this is something that the religious people who make arguments against parts of science, because it happens to conflict with their holy books, they need to understand this. Things are nowhere near as clear in subject areas such as history, psychology, and the study of religions. Anyone who gets involved in the discussion about which religious ideology, if any, is actually true, will sooner or later find themselves being accused of pseudo hermeneutics. For example, Ken Ham and Hugh Ross both accuse each other of this when it comes to how to interpret certain parts of the Bible. They're both creationists, but Hugh Ross happens to be an astrophysicist and argues that God created the universe nearly 14 billion years ago, and that the Hebrew word yom does not refer to a 24-hour day in Genesis 1. There are many atheists who simply don't care about being accused of pseudo-hermeneutics, because they've already reached the conclusion that holy books are nonsense and should not be taken seriously. So why do I feel compelled to make a video about this question, you might wonder? I think it has a lot to do with the fact that I've never been a religious believer. I sense a lot of bitterness towards religion, particularly the more fundamental varieties, coming from ex-believers. They feel angry at having been lied to and conned for so long. So many people, when they see through the obvious nonsense of young earth creationism, turn their back completely on their religion and become strong atheists. Some, however, turn their back on fundamentalism but retain a belief in a creator of some kind and focus a lot more attention on the study of the origin of the texts they used to believe so literally, and try to figure out whether something might have been lost during the translation from dead dialects to English. I've mentioned Bishop John Shelby Spong before, and I'm intrigued by the way he fully supports the findings of science, but retains his belief in the teachings of Jesus. For anyone who, like me, is interested in trying to figure out whether there is truth and teachings of value hidden in the Bible, I highly recommend the New Covenant group. This is a collection of theists and atheists who promote honest and friendly conversation between people who hold different points of view. They release several videos every week on Ustream and YouTube, and also have frequent Google Hangouts. The guy who founded the group, Dr. Michael Jones, has a good understanding of linguistics and has helped me to understand how the Hebrew and Greek texts have been translated into English, as well as the pitfalls and traps which fundamentalists inevitably fall into. Like Spong, he's a believer in Jesus, but rejects the idea that a God would require the shedding of blood in order to forgive. They also have a guy called Bob Greaves, who is known as the unconventional pastor. He describes himself as an agnostic theist, and I can relate to a lot of what he says. I feel like I'm only just on the other side of the theist-atheist fence from him. Neither of us want to get other people to think just like we do and draw the same conclusions. Another regular contributor is Ozymandias Ramses II, who always has something interesting to add to the conversation. You've probably already heard of some of these people. I'll put as many relevant links as I can find in the description. I first stumbled across them when they interviewed Eric Hovind and Cy ten Bruggencate. They've also had David Silverman, Jerry DeWitt, Lawrence Krauss, and many more on their shows. So, if like me and the Thinking Atheist, you're more interested in building bridges than burning them, do check out the New Covenant group and tell them I said hi.